welcome to NBC 17's 2009 Hurricane Preparedness Special. I'm Chief Meteorologist Wes Hohenstein. For the next 30 minutes, we will help you and your family get ready for this year's hurricane season. And this season holds special meaning for North Carolina because it was 10 years ago that Hurricane Floyd hit our state. The storm hit early on a Thursday morning, September 16th, 1999. It killed 56 people in the United States, 35 in North Carolina. And at the time, it was one of the deadliest hurricanes to hit the U.S. in almost 30 years. Floyd dumped 20 inches of rain in some parts of the state and caused about $6 billion in damage. But that was 10 years ago. A lot has changed in central North Carolina since then. So, as we get ready for this year's season, we will look back to Floyd of 1999, both the meteorology of the storm and the personal stories that for some people still seem like yesterday. We have a long list of experts from right here in Raleigh to all the way in Colorado, from the hurricane expert at the Weather Channel to the hurricane director of the National Hurricane Center. We talk to them all. And we also take you inside the Hurricane Hunter airplane, the one that goes inside the eye of a hurricane. We'll go over some important things to think about now before we even think about tracking a storm later in the year on its way to North Carolina. But what about last season? That's where we'll start. The 6 months that was the 2008 hurricane season. It seems like a long time ago, but it was another busy one. 16 named storms, 8 hurricanes, 5 of them major. And the U.S. had 6 landfalls. For North Carolina, it was Tropical Storm Hannah. She came ashore in September, right on the North Carolina-South Carolina border. And while Hannah did some damage along the coast, it wasn't a terribly strong system by the time it got here. The eye, however, did move right through the eastern part of central North Carolina. It brought us winds over 40 miles an hour, and some of us got 6 inches of rain. But again, those are just a few of the side effects. It was Ike and Gustav, both hurricanes that stole the national headlines of the 2008 season. Ike at one time was a Category 4 hurricane and had a devastating impact on Louisiana and Texas when it moved ashore in September as a strong Category 2 hurricane. Damage estimates in the U.S. are approaching $20 billion, making it the 4th costliest hurricane ever to hit the U.S., behind Katrina, Andrew in '92, and Wilma in 2005. Now, Gustav also hit Louisiana a few weeks before Ike. And although Gustav was not as strong as Ike, it was a slow mover, which meant a lot of flooding issues. So if you were to ask 2 different people about last year's hurricane season, you'd get 2 entirely different answers from someone in North Carolina, say someone down in Louisiana or Texas, which they had 2 major hurricanes to deal with in a short period of time. So as some coastal residents are still cleaning up from last year, it's already time to prepare for this year. And the first thing we'll do is look at all the forecasts for this upcoming season. And we begin with the team from Colorado State and with the man who's been doing hurricane forecasting longer than anyone else, Dr. William Gray. He reminds us just because the last few seasons have been busy, that doesn't necessarily tell us a lot about this season.
We're in a very active period now. We have been since 1995. And but even with inactive periods, you can have very low seasons.
That low season for Dr. Gray and his team includes 12 named storms, 6 hurricanes, and 2 intense hurricanes, which are Category 3 or higher, having winds greater than 110 miles per hour. Dr. Gray goes on to tell us that one of the reasons we might see less activity this year is because of our old friend El Nino.
We're in one of these active periods. We tend to have fewer El Ninos. When you're in a weaker hurricane period, we tend to have more. You know, El Ninos reduce the number of storms greatly.
Now, don't let the name fool you. Even though they are based in Colorado, Dr. Gray has been forecasting for more than 50 years, and his team issuing seasonal hurricane forecasts since the early 80s. A lot closer to home is the team from North Carolina State University, led by Dr. Leon Shea. They too are leaning toward a season that won't be as busy as last year, and in addition to El Nino reasons, they base part of their forecast on early year water temperatures in the tropical portion of the Atlantic Ocean.
We found out that there is a fairly good correlation between that temperature difference between tropical north and tropical south Atlantic Ocean. That's usually an indication of a less active season.
The NC State team is calling for 11 to 14 named storms and 6 to 8 of those becoming hurricanes. Now, Dr. Shea's team does not issue a number for intense hurricanes, but they do say there's a 45% chance that one of those storms will make landfall along the coast of the southeastern United States as a hurricane. And finally, our government. Their forecasts tend to be more general as they stress preparedness more than the hype of seasonal forecasts. But when the director of the National Hurricane Center was in Raleigh earlier in May, he talked with us about why that is and how we might learn an important lesson from an inactive season more than a decade ago.
In '92, we had Hurricane Andrew hit South Florida. It's in the top 2 or 3 on our most costly storms list. 6 storms the whole year. The seasonal forecast, we can't tell you where or when a hurricane will hit. Just a general feel for the conditions that have produced hurricanes as to how many there might be all year.
All right, now there was one other notable forecast this year, and that was from AccuWeather.com. Their numbers also call for lower overall number of named storms and even fewer landfalls in the United States. However, Joe Bastardi of AccuWeather.com, he's the hurricane specialist, he says that 3 hurricanes will either strike or brush the U.S. coast, with the eastern part of the U.S., the eastern part, that's us, being the primary target. So we will see. And those are the numbers. But as you heard the director of the National Hurricane Center say, it's all about being prepared, because it just takes one storm to make it a very bad season. And I don't know if you noticed when we were talking with him, but behind the director of the National Hurricane Center, there was a big airplane, and that was the P-3 Hurricane Hunter. That airplane flies directly into the eye of the hurricane, gathering important information for the forecasters on the ground when a hurricane's approaching. And that's what the men and women of the Hurricane Hunter Air Force Squadron do each time a tropical storm or hurricane threatens land in the U.S., Mexico, or Caribbean. That airplane, as well as the crew, were in Raleigh recently, and we got a chance to talk to them. And the obvious question to ask is, what's it like flying in an airplane into a monster hurricane?
And for the most part, it's like probably the worst turbulence you've experienced on an airliner, and it goes up from there. People say, you must be crazy. That's probably the first thing people say, and then they start talking to you a little bit, and it's really not as bad as one would imagine.
They'll fly actually right into the storm. They don't fly around it, they fly right through. They provide us at the Hurricane Center with a lot of valuable data. If we didn't have the plane, we'd have to estimate what the winds are and estimate a lot of things from satellite.
Now, the typical crew for a hurricane mission is about 6 team members, 3 very experienced pilots, a navigator, a weather office, and a systems operator. And as you can imagine, Hurricane Hunter pilots have one of the most interesting jobs on the planet, with some amazing tales. And we talked with Commander Choi for quite a while and have posted the entire interview on our website, Wncn.com. Check it out when you have some time. But coming up next, as we talked about, it's been 10 years since Hurricane Floyd hit our area, and some of the tales you may not remember, and we'll revisit them right after this.
And people say, I can't imagine that much water being in one place, but that's exactly what happened.
We talked to people who spent the last decade rebuilding after losing everything during Floyd.
The black mark on the board up there, on that white board, is where the water leveled off in.
Well, that video and sound you saw was from Hurricane Floyd. Came ashore near Wilmington 10 years ago now, September of 1999. And Bill Ray, our morning meteorologist, working and living through that storm. And Bill, this is a storm that has been called the worst disaster ever for North Carolina. At one point, it was a Category 5 in the Caribbean, and it's coming to North Carolina. So walk me through the weather, the meteorology of the storm first.
Well, I mean, a couple weeks before, we had a tropical storm Dennis that saturated the soils. I mean, really flooded parts of Raleigh and the Crabtree Creek, but also down east. It came from the Outer Banks and went kind of westward across the state. So that was unusual, but we thought, okay, we've had a tropical storm. We had Fran 3 years earlier. we're going to make it through. And then all of a sudden, within 10 days, the F storm of the year, Hurricane Floyd, comes in. You mentioned it was a Category 5, and it appeared to be coming up the same kind of path that some of the classic storms like Hazel and Fran, coming out of the Caribbean or the Bahamas and coming up from the Bahamas toward North Carolina. So it became apparent that it was coming somewhere in the southeast as a Category 5. Well, it started to degrade a little bit, but when it got close to land, it really behaved. I mean, it came ashore like we thought within 12 or 24 hours, a little north of Wilmington in that area, and then just dumped the rain. I remember it was nighttime, and we were working, forecasting it, and then you just know that, you tell people, hey, it's raining, here comes the storm, hunker down, but you didn't really realize what was happening at the time until you saw it.
Right, we cover so many storms from afar, and then we can just go home and things are normal, but you had to cover the storm and then go home and deal, your house, your family, you went into the communities. What did you see?
Well, first of all, down in the Triangle, going home here wasn't as bad as Fran, because Fran came right over the Triangle. Right. And then we started hearing, well, there's tons of flooding going on down east in the coastal plain. And you're like, well, all the way to the coast, that's amazing. So then I was fortunate enough to get out and do a little reporting and go see it firsthand, because like you said, we're always stuck in the studio. And we got out and took a helicopter ride with some federal officials to look at the area, and landing there and just seeing everybody, trying to find a place to land, getting over Rocky Mount, seeing all the water was just amazing, and how the Tar River was flooded. It was just amazing.
I mean, so you were surprised. Even though you covered it, you still were just baffled.
Well, and when you get in and get to talk to people and see that they're washed out of their house. I talked to one man that talked about in Princeville that watched the water come up to his front porch in the middle of the night now, and then all of a sudden sees the water come up to the mail slot in the door, then it came up to the top of the door. They got to get out for their lives. I mean, I just can't imagine living through that actual thing that they did.
Yeah, well, and Princeville, one of the hardest hit towns in our region. Of course, Princeville, just outside Tarboro, about an hour east of Raleigh. And while the devastation from Floyd in the Triangle was hit or miss, as Bill mentioned, the entire town of Princeville was flooded, and every single resident affected. And as our Josh Green found out, 10 years later, the memories of that hurricane are still very fresh.
From the banks of the Tar River, history emerged back in 1885.
The town was started after the Emancipation Proclamation when freed slaves came across the river and ran into the Union soldiers.
Princeville, the first town chartered by African Americans. By 1999, about 2,000 people lived here near the Tar River. But those banks that breathed new life a century ago would change history again.
We just started to have water I guess, the water coming up from the ground.
A monster pounded the old town. Hurricane Floyd. The dike, 3 miles long, 32 feet high, couldn't hold any more.
The biggest church that we have in town down on Neville Street, St. Luke, the only thing that you could see on that church was a steeple.
The mechanic just outside the town limits only had time to grab his dog.
When we got down the street there, the water was so high we had to duck to go under the stoplight. That was in 45 minutes.
It meant all 700 buildings in town vanished. Homes, people's cherished belongings disappeared.
On the television, I saw my house, and the only thing I saw was the top.
Rescuers scrambled to get everyone out.
2 people and some horses on an overpass up on 258 about 4 miles north that won out.
For 10 brutal days, the town stayed under that smelly water. Lifelong residents were homeless for the first time.
The next morning when I woke up, I didn't, the first thing you do is brush your teeth. I didn't even have a toothbrush.
That table back there would be fine.
And in the box of images burned into Mayor Delia Perkins' mind.
Down some of the roads right close to the cemetery, they were just floating.
163 caskets forced out of the ground by the water.
I wondered, how we were going to find out about all of these bodies, where they were supposed to be.
Fortunately, Princeville didn't lose one living soul. It took 2 years to rebuild the old town. Through it all, some said townspeople should just move, that the Tar River could strike again.
The people that had founded Princeville had been through hardship and struggles, and we felt like, it would be a disservice to just up and leave it.
Princeville, North Carolina regained its population and added a couple hundred more. The town is still working to fix drainage problems, and the Army Corps of Engineers is studying to see if they could change that dike around the Tar River, a river that put a town on the map, and if not for the resiliency of those who lived here, one that nearly wiped it off of it about a decade ago.
And that was our Josh Green reporting. Even though Floyd was 10 years ago, many of the same people forecasting and watching the weather today were watching the skies a decade ago when Floyd changed so many lives.
Ended up landfalling in North Carolina as a Category 2, but it was a massive flooding event inland in North Carolina. And so here was this evacuation for winds on the coast, and we end up with a Category 2 with the big impact, that toe of rainfall flooding inland that was just devastating, and many people lost their lives there and lost their homes and all the property in them as well. You know, the hurricane footprint has 5 toes, and 2 of the toes are inland toes, well, 3 of them actually. One is wind, another one is heavy rainfall flooding potential, and then of course there's always the tornado threat as well. So those 3 inland events are very important.
By the time Floyd came, we saw that speed was relatively slow. We knew it was going to be a heavy rainer on ground that was basically concrete, so we knew we were looking at a historic event. Once you started getting to the Neuse River area on towards the Tar, it was a life-changing event that people here will be comparing for the rest of their lives.
But the thing that scared us the most was the extra 5 to 10 inches or more that you were going to get in rain on top of already flooded soils. And that's what happened. We ended up with disastrous flooding on overland flooding and in the rivers across eastern North Carolina.
Well, while we hope we never see another Floyd in North Carolina, that doesn't mean we shouldn't prepare. And up next, we go over more than just your typical hurricane preparedness supplies, what you and your family haven't thought about when a hurricane is approaching. Next.
Be ready every year. Forget about the seasonal forecast. Forget about what happened last year or the year before. Just be ready this year.
And that was the Weather Channel's Dr. Steve Lyons reiterating the importance of being prepared for a hurricane and for a hurricane season. And everyone knows about having food and water on hand, but what about some of the things that we don't talk a lot about? Things that could make a big difference during and after the storm. NBC 17's Peter Kunish takes it from here.
Thanks, Wes. Every year we talk about hurricane preparedness. We talk about stocking up on water, non-perishable foods, and batteries. Those things are important, but now let's look at some things you may not have thought about, starting with something we use every day, our cell phones.
Chances are, because of an overloaded system or down towers, most cell phone calls won't go through. But text messages and cell phone email often will work. Make sure you know how to text and send emails from your cell phone, and be sure your cell phone is fully charged. Another good idea is to have a car charger in case the power is out. If the power or internet does go out, credit cards are not going to work. So while you're out filling your car up with gas right before the storm hits, stop by an ATM, because cash will be king. You've heard us talk about batteries for radios, flashlights, and other electronics, but one other option is a hand-cranked flashlight or radio that doesn't need batteries. You simply crank them up, and they're good to go. Keep track of your personal documents in a plastic bag. It's a great idea to take a short video or a few still pictures of your house contents and your property to document all of your belongings. This is a perfect example of how a little time investment now could pay off big time if you have to cross paths with an insurance adjuster. One more myth we should squash right now, duct tape on the windows. It's truly a waste of time and money. The tape will not strengthen your windows, and if you do put it on and nothing happens, you'll have a sticky mess to clean up after the storm. Things like bug spray, matches, gas cooktops, work gloves, duct tape, and even a manual can opener can make a huge difference.
Finally, most of what we talked about is concerning you and your human family members. Many of us have pets that are just like family, and they're going to need to be taken care of as well. Don't forget about them, and hopefully these tips have got you thinking about the what-ifs for North Carolina during the hurricane season. There's no harm in being overly prepared. For more tips to help keep you and your family safe, go to Wncn.com and use the keyword hurricane.
All right, Peter, thank you very much. And remember, having a friend or family member outside of the hurricane zone will be important. Decide who that person's going to be and let them be the person that everyone else contacts for updates on you and your family. We'll be right back.
Moving to LA to host The Tonight Show changed me. I wake up early every morning for long runs on the beach. My pale Irish skin burning like a vampire in the sun.
Well, we hope this hurricane special has been helpful, and we hope you can put this information to good use and stay safe during the hurricane season. Remember, you can get a look at everything that we've talked about in this special on our website, Wncn.com. And for the entire NBC 17 team, I'm Wes Hohenstein. Thanks for joining us.
Now, you don't have to click through tons of online sources to get your community news. At Wncn.com, we've put them all together for you, all on one convenient, easy-to-use site. Go to Wncn.com, click on your community, and get all the local news from all sources. No one else makes getting in touch with your community easier. Multiple sources in the triangle, together on one site. Wncn.com.
I enjoy blogging about the furry little creatures trying to take over my home, about what's happening around the triangle,
and sometimes what's happening above the triangle,
about the funny things I find online, but most of all, I love blogging about the weather and the magic of television, and that's my story. I'm NBC 17 Chief Meteorologist Wes Hohenstein. Join me on my blog on Wncn.com.